if you really want to capture value from generative AI, you need to think long-term. A lot of times Fortune 500 companies say they want to empower their employees, but they don't. It's from a product market fit perspective. And so if you're not spending time with customers as a founder and a developer, you don't understand if you're solving a real problem. The benchmarks we're measuring for large language models have nothing to do with any business problem. They're cool, they're interesting, they have nothing to do with anything in the enterprise.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Long Game. In today's episode, my guest is Dr. Seth Dobrin, who has formerly been the Global Chief of AI at IBM. He's held leadership positions on data engineering and data science at Monsanto, and has recently started a $500 million fund to invest in AI startups in remote and different geographic regions. In the conversation, we talk about living forever using AI, talk about AGI and what the implications are for life in 30 years when we don't need to work. We also talk about ethics relating to AI and how we should be having honest conversations, how a lot of jobs will be replaced in this coming future. We go into so much more and really get into different ideas around what it means to use AI responsibly and have a positive impact and positive outlook while also being pragmatic in this rapidly changing world. I hope you learned something and enjoy. One of the things that's extremely interesting about your background is that you've had the impact with large companies, Monsanto, IBM, leading all of AI there, and then also have this exposure to AI on kind of the earlier stages, the startups, the consulting side. What would you say is the difference in approach that startups maybe get and enterprise doesn't, and then equally what enterprise gets that startups don't get?
Yeah, so, I think one of the reasons that I've been able to have impact at Fortune 500 companies and helped other Fortune 500 companies when I was at IBM is that early in my career, I worked at startups, and I've always taken a startup approach at Fortune 500 companies. And I think a lot of times Fortune 500 companies say they want to empower their employees, but they don't. So they don't, really empower their employees to innovate, to do things. And I think that's one thing that they miss is that, even early professional employees have a lot to say and create. In fact, they probably have the most to say when it comes to innovation and new ideas, and they have the least amount of voice. And more importantly, they actually are the ones that know what's going on, but they're also the ones who often get their voice diluted the most, or in worst cases, they're scared to speak up. Whereas in a startup, everyone, in a good startup, everyone needs to be honest. Everyone's encouraged to be honest. Right. And so what's going on. And I think that's the biggest mistake that I see happens in Fortune 500 companies. I think in startups, I think many startups, lack the discipline around sales. I think they focus too much on the innovation and don't really focus on the sales. And why is that important? It's not just from a money perspective, but it's from a product market fit perspective. And so if you're not spending time with customers as a founder and a developer, you don't understand if you're solving a real problem. It may be a cool problem, but it's not a real problem. And a good example of that, what's going on today, is, we have all these large language models with all these fantastic benchmarks that are completely disconnected from any business problem. The benchmarks we're measuring for large language models have nothing to do with any business problem. They're cool, they're interesting, but they don't matter when you implement them in the enterprise. They have nothing to do with anything in the enterprise.
I think that's a really good answer, first of all. But even when you talk about your impact at Monsanto, you tie it back to real business terms. You generated $5 billion of value in your first role, and then $17 billion of impact in your second role. And I think that you've put it more succinctly than most have. Product market fit is something that you always hear. It's bandied about. It's a term. It's an idea. But really what it is making sure that you're solving a problem that people will pay money for, that you are driving enterprise value for someone somewhere. And that's in exchange of typically money. Maybe it's, a consumer product is something else, but most things are about the business side. Do you think AI has the ability to kind of change how startups find product market fit? And is that something that you're looking for with your thesis for the investing side? Or is it just startups as usual where you're investing on team, idea, go to market and kind of the typical vectors?
I think eventually I think AI can help hone in on product market fit, but I think when push comes to shove, I think you still need to sit down with a customer. I think you still need to, be in the trenches working with them to make sure that what you're building they will actually use. Because I think the problem is, and you see this today, what people say they'll use and what they actually use are not always and frequently the same thing. And so
that classic story of like the focus group where you say, hey, we're building this thing. Would you want to use it? They say yes. And they say, hey, we have it out back, but you paid for it because you said you would. And they're like, oh, well, actually, no.
Right. Exactly. So when I was at Monsanto around 2011, 2012, we were starting to make the cloud transformation also. We were, Monsanto and Capital One were the first two companies to really make that leap. And all of the, name a, tech company, startup today that's, Databricks, name them. We were their first customer, right? Us and Capital One. They had people sitting with us, right? And the value to them was they weren't solving a problem that we thought we had, right? Or that they thought we had. They were solving problems that we actually had, right? We weren't paying them to sit there. They were sitting there. Google had people sitting there with us. Amazon, I mean, they all had people sitting there with us. And it wasn't, yes, it was free, but it was probably more valuable to them than it was to us because they were solving real problems. And what was the value? The value to them was they were solving a real problem for us. And the value to us was they were solving a real problem for us, right? And so that's kind of when I advise startups and I introduce them to, CDOs or CIOs at Fortune 500 companies, that's kind of what I tell them. I'm like, look, they're solving a real problem for you, Fortune 500 CIO, which means that you'll have something you'll use, right? And founder, you're solving a real problem for them, which means you'll have something they'll buy and probably some other CIO will buy it. And so, I think that's the best, in my mind, that's the best way to frame up product market fit. I really hardly ever say product market fit in that situation. It's just, problem, everyone wins.
Yeah, I think that is there's too much of this idea of let me build something that's cool or something that's fun or something that I resonate with. But then when it comes down to building for a discrete problem that solves something for someone, and then can you find more of those someones, then you actually have a business and you can scale it up from there.
Right. And it's probably not very sexy either, which is great because then there's not a whole lot of people working on it.
With your fund, is there a particular lens that you see within AI that's being underfunded or underinvested in? Because we've come out of the zero interest rate environment. We had a flood of dollars that was kind of pent up flowing into AI. We've kind of had AI fatigue, some people have coined, when it comes to generative AI specifically around chatbots and custom LLMs and things that people think will just be destroyed by the foundational models kind of replacing certain capabilities. Where do you see the opportunity within the generative AI or AI in general from a startup perspective?
Yeah, so I have my Substack, my newsletter, right, Silicon Sands News, and I write about this a lot. And I don't know that I don't think I can name a space that's completely underfunded per se, because there's so many opportunities. I can say there's a space that's completely overfunded, which is this whole transformer architecture space.
The hardware side of things?
No, just the transformer model in general. So I think
Creating new
that's,
gotcha.
Yeah, well, even investing in, I think transformer models, these large language models, I don't know that there's a whole lot of enterprise use for them in terms of, actual implementation and getting value. Everyone's using them in a RAG architecture. You grab, GPT-4o, you use it. You can't use it without using RAG. Any good RAG implementation requires 4 to 5 calls on an API. So now not only do you have an API call, you have 4x, maybe 5x that call. Very expensive. You're already killing your ROI there. You don't really need, you don't really need that all that knowledge or all that information in there, you probably need a small model version of that. It's not really, they don't have the transparency, they don't have the level of explainability most organizations need. There's technologies out there like neurosymbolic AI, there's neuromorphic computing, there's all these technologies that are coming up that I think that are getting invested in, I think that are more valuable. So, I mean, I think you're starting to see investment in small models. You're starting to see investment in neuromorphic compute. You're starting to see investment in Bayesian compute again. I mean, so you're starting to see investment in all these other areas. I think outside of small models, which is what the transformer architecture, which is what the T in GPT stands for, I'm not planning on putting a whole lot of money into any transformer architecture outside of small models, to be completely honest. I think it's over invested in.
The opportunity is outside of that, but still finding unique companies that fit the profile of solving a real problem for someone, kind of the typical startup thesis of quality investing, but with the penchant for AI.
Absolutely. And certainly not investing in any wrappers around any GPT. I think that's complete waste of money.
Yeah. With going back to IBM, I mean, you entered IBM prior to this current LLM and GPT era. What was it like? What was the attitude towards AI at that time? And again, AI is such a generic term. So maybe you want to speak towards machine learning or, custom models or, transformer technology. What was it like then versus kind of entering into this next epoch where AI is probably the fifth word out of a lot of people's mouths in the tech world? How has it shifted your perspective?
Yeah, so I guess first and foremost, one of the things they asked me to do when I joined IBM was to figure out IBM did not have the world did not have a great perspective of IBM and AI at that point. And so they asked me to figure out how to change that perspective. And so I built a team of data scientists, a couple hundred data scientists that we used to sit with customers free of charge for engagements. And so, we spent a lot of time and a lot of money kind of changing perspectives. That was one thing we did. And through those engagements,
was this around like Watson and building on top of Watson, or is this kind of like Watson's dead? Let's reestablish ourselves as like AI leaders.
No. There were two things going on simultaneously. So one is, and I actually wrote a response to a New York Times article that said, New York Times wrote, someone in New York Times wrote an article that whatever happened to Watson. I wrote a response. It's on LinkedIn. You can see it. IBM made a lot of mistakes when it came to Watson. In terms of number one, it was too early to market, and I wasn't there. They overpromised and couldn't deliver because it was very early in the game. And then everything became Watson, even things that weren't really AI. And so we corrected that during this time when we were out there with customers. We corrected that. And I'm not saying anything that's not in that article. And so we did this during that time. So we were correcting everything being Watson, so nothing was Watson. Essentially, it's, if you've ever seen the movie The Incredibles, the kids movie, the whole point of that movie was make everyone a superhero so no one's a superhero. That's what IBM did with Watson. We corrected that. And they've continued with that today. And so only things that really have AI are called Watson. And so we changed the perception both on the brand, and Watson's a very strong brand. Even then, it was a very strong brand. It continues to be a very strong brand. And so anyway, I think we get the point. So we did that. Through those engagements with the data science elite team, as we called it, it became apparent that most organizations were investing a lot of money in AI or data science at the time and machine learning, and were getting no value. And so I started flying around the world giving this talk and writing articles about data science being a scam. And as you can imagine, our comms team and marketing team loved it. But the point was
catchy title.
Yeah. Well, but it was true, because you're investing all this money and it actually has negative ROI because you're not getting any value. So you're sinking a lot of money and getting no value. And you mentioned earlier that, I was talking billions of dollars. I mean, we could tell you almost to the penny how much we were making at from these programs at Monsanto. And if you're not tracking value, you're not generating value, why are you doing it? And what it comes down to is there was no strategy. And why am I bringing this up now? Because we're seeing the same thing with generative AI, right? People are calling me up with Qantm, with my consulting business, and saying, hey, I want to use generative AI. That's not the right question. That's the complete wrong question, right? The right question is, what's my business strategy? So what am I promising the street or my owners? You know, how can I use technology to accelerate meeting those targets? Data, AI, generative AI is inevitably part of that solution, and you prioritize those tools based on those solutions, but you don't call someone up, and I'm shooting my business in the foot here, but you don't call someone up and say, how do I use generative AI? I mean, that's just not the right approach, because you're just going to make stuff that may or may not drive your business forward. And yes, you should start doing something with generative AI while you're building the strategy, but you shouldn't just keep doing stuff and not have it tied to a business strategy.
I think that last comment is actually undervalued as well. So we have this over-index towards, I want to use hammers. How should I use a hammer, right? Rather than saying, I want to build a house. Well, can I use a hammer to help me build the house, right? So there's this over-fixation on the tool, and everyone wants to kind of have a generative AI strategy and build something with it, but they're not finding a problem and then saying, is this a good tool for that solution? So I think that's extremely widespread. I think the second part that you commented on is underappreciated, which is you should still use generative AI while you're trying to figure out what problems you want to solve and what tools, maybe AI, are solutions for that. And I think the value of that is this is like it's a new landscape, it's a new world. And so you need to have some level of understanding, and we all learn the best by doing, by playing, by working with something. And so I think that piece too is, I just want to like underscore, I really agree with you on the point that you should be building, you should be doing something with generative AI, even while exploring, is generative AI the right solution for whatever problems you're trying to solve, because you need to be more informed.
Yeah, and you can use it, even if it ends up having no value. What you should do is you should be using it to build capacity across the whole organization. And let me go back to Monsanto again. When we were doing this with data science and cloud in general, just cloud, we had a company-wide hackathon, and literally company-wide. We invited admins, we invited janitors, we invited literally everyone across the organization. We had presentations for people that were not technical. We taught people how to build microservices if they were technical. We taught people Python. We taught them, I mean, there was something for everyone, and it was global. So we had these set up all around the world. And yeah, we kind of were trying to be thoughtful about what we built, but the point wasn't really to build something valuable, right? The point was to have something for everyone. So we brought something down for everyone's level, and everyone left that walking away with something that made them more familiar with what we were trying to implement at the time, which was cloud, data, so data in terms of, kind of the new cloud data technologies, and data science. And it was quite successful. And, with the CEO, the whole executive team showed up for lunch, and, and their equivalents around the world, something like that. And then it doesn't matter. The point is not to have a generative AI tool that's successful out of that. The point is you've built organizational capacity, you've built organizational awareness. And so that's really the value. It's not the tool that's the value in that case.
You've used the term technological colonialism and also talked about the merits of kind of democratizing and having diversity in AI. What does that term mean to you? And then also, how is this kind of an example of bringing technology, bringing AI to everyone?
Yeah. So, one of the challenges with the way that, with foundation models in general, and foundation models are pre-trained deep learning models. And so
the OpenAIs of the world, the Anthropics, et cetera.
Yeah. All of these, Claude, ChatGPT, Llama, all of these AI tools that anyone's heard of, they're all foundation models. And they've scraped the internet, and they've pre-trained these models on the internet. And there's Chinese versions of all of these too. And primarily, all of these models are being developed by people that look like you and I in San Francisco, or Chinese versions of you and I in Beijing. And they're built off of data that's scraped off the internet. And the data that's scraped off the internet represents people that have connectivity to the internet. And if you look at a graph of people that have connectivity in the internet, there's large swaths of the world that lack connectivity, including most of the most populous country in the world, which is India. India actually has one of the lowest connectivity rates in the world, and then most of Africa and parts of South America. And so data that's built into these models that we're saying is going to add $17 trillion of GDP by 2030, you have these large swaths of the world that don't have their cultures, their languages, their perspectives represented in the data. We have large swaths of the world, including half of the gender of the world, not represented in these models. And so what's happening is that we are now inflicting white and Chinese and a little bit of Indian male perspectives on the rest of the world if they want to participate in this potential $17 trillion of GDP by 2030. And I call it technological colonialism because if you go back to colonial times, what happened then was you had the colonists using technology. Technology at that time was ships, cannons, and guns to inflict their culture, religion, and language on the rest of the world. And the ramifications of that is you now have languages whose origin represents about 1.5% of the total global population. So England, Portugal, France, and Spain combined, those countries represent about 1.5% of the total population. They represent 4 of the 5 top languages, or 4 of the 10 top languages spoken in the world.
Wow.
Right? And so we could potentially see the same thing, the same impact of this. And so
and it's not even just language, right? I mean, there's cultural norms that are also exported. It's so many, the perspective in life and values and beliefs. It's so much.
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why my partners and I set up this global fund, is we're actually intentionally setting up centers in the Middle East, in Asia with this first fund. And when we set up the second fund in a few years, hopefully we'll also set up in Africa and South America. And so we want to help build capacity in underrepresented parts of the world. And again, it's not capacity for the sake of building capacity. It's very good companies with very good founders who are often overlooked because they're not people that look like you and I. They're not in the US. They're not in China. And data shows they're not taken seriously.
We talked about the long-term ramifications of traditional colonialism, and I think it's a very common historical scar that has been explored and discussed, and we can see the multiple centuries of impact coming from that. If we don't address this now with AI, what do you see as the long-term ramifications of not having diversity in thought and in this new epoch that's upon us?
Yeah, I think that doesn't even get into the socioeconomical impacts of the job displacement,
where
right?
the wealth goes, the job displacement, the money.
Yeah. And so I think, and there's also kind of socioeconomical disparities inside countries, right? We didn't talk about that either, which is also part of the technological colonialism, because you have intra-country technological colonialism as well. So what we're going to see is an increase, at least in my opinion, an increase in social strife, because you're going to have a greater disconnect and greater separation between haves and have-nots. We're going to see an even greater increase in the global digital divide, which is going to create more social strife. And then combined with the jobs issue, because this is another technological revolution or industrial revolution, past industrial revolutions have occurred over 3 to 5 generations. This one's probably going to occur in one. How are we going to transform the workforce? Combined with the issues of climate change, we've got this kind of convergence of issues that are going to create some kind of global crises that's going to create some, some kind of economical, macro and microeconomic, I don't know, crises, for lack of a better word, that we're going to have to think about how we address that. Unfortunately, public companies and even private companies aren't incentivized to get ahead of. Nothing's going to change until that crisis occurs. So, I mean, push comes to shove, there's not much we can do about it because public companies are not incentivized to do anything about it until something bad happens.
You have talked about how you want to kind of have an impact with this changing of the guard, with this, you said one generation is where this change and revolution is going to happen. You talked about with your fund, how you're trying to have impact on that. With Qantm and your consulting, what's the impact that you're trying to achieve with Qantm? And do you have any particular examples of how you've helped companies shift their thought and approach to AI?
Well, so one thing I do is I talk about the jobs issue. I think a lot of people who are in the AI space aren't as straightforward as they should be with the jobs issue. I think we beat around the bush with jobs are going to be replaced, right? So people are going to have their jobs automated away, full stop. And even when we say, well, most jobs are going to be augmented. Okay, let's just assume that most jobs are going to be augmented, right? Okay, Elijah, you and I do the same job. Our jobs are going to be augmented. We can do our jobs 50% faster, right? Okay, so now companies are incentivized to increase their profits. You and I can do our jobs 50% faster. Well, we only need one of us now.
Or do twice as much work.
We only need one of us now. That's what's going to happen, right? And so, I mean, look at what's happened in the past, right? It's not we can do twice as much work. It's typically we're going to see a reduction in workforce. Maybe it'll be, well, you'll do 25% more, and instead of 1 to 1, it'll be one every other one, right? But I mean, if we look at what's happened in the past with things like this, there usually are a reduction in workforce. Now, net, when we get past this 10 years from now, absolutely there will be new jobs. Absolutely there will be more jobs. That's every other industrial revolution. We've seen more jobs on the back end. 100%, I agree with that. This transition is going to be very different than every other industrial revolution. But I fully agree that there will be new jobs. Do we know what they are? I don't think so. But, I think we thought, I don't think anyone really thought prompt engineering was going to be a new job. That's the shortest job ever because, one killed that job, or for the most part killed it. But, we don't really know what the new jobs are yet. But, I think it's an issue. So, and that's one of the things I do is I try and be straightforward with leaders that this is a problem. You need to think hard about how you do this. If you really want to capture value from generative AI, you need to think long-term. And if you want people around to buy your products, if you want to have people participate in the economy, you need to think about even people that you're going to let go. How are you going to make sure that they can participate in the economy so that they can buy your products and your services?
Do you think that it will be, because I want to challenge you a little bit on this, because I think you're the first person I've spoken to that has that mindset that there will be, at least in the short term, massive, high volume impact to employment and people being let go to optimize for profits. Because with the ability to do work with less effort, what necessarily, you mentioned kind of it's happened before in the past, but what necessarily lends itself to saying people are just going to optimize profits rather than have more GDP or company increase in volume and effort? And I guess tied to that as well, do you see it as like a 10-year horizon of like massive unemployment increasing, or where do you see these roles going?
Well, I mean, haven't we seen it in the last year with all these tech layoffs? I mean, we've seen Facebook, IBM, Google, Microsoft laying off all these people because of generative AI. We've seen it in HR. We've seen it in marketing. We've seen it in
Is
software
that
development.
though, or is it the fact that we've been in this weird frothy bubble for 10 years with low interest rates?
They contributed some to that. There's companies that don't have customer service departments anymore. I think JPM, I think they said they expect their software development space to be cut in half over the next 5 years because of generative AI. I mean, if you look at some of software development is going to be decimated by generative AI. I mean, we know that for a fact.
Right. At some point, it will be good enough. What
are all these and it's not going to be that long. I mean, there are tools today that can automate 80% of the software development lifecycle. Yes, you still need software developers, but you don't need as many. And they're going to be doing more value-added work, but you don't need as many. I think there's lots of evidence that says, so even if the tech companies, even if half of the people they laid off is because of it was a bloated industry, which I agree it was, but there were a lot of people in the tech industry that were laid off that were not software developers. They were in support functions, and not talent acquisition support functions, which would be bloated with the development. So I think we're already starting to see signs of this. So that's what makes me think that. Plus, just the software development space, I think we know that's going to happen there. 100% we know it.
That's definitely interesting. So going back to kind of how you advise through Qantm, you were talking about the balance between you need to make sure that there is still a consumer economy, that there is some function for these people that you do lay off in the economy after you exit them and you replace them with AI. What does that look like? How do you ethically approach that as a business where you are a for-profit company? You are bound by your shareholder agreement, for better or for worse, to generate as much profit as possible. This is the pathway through layoffs and increasing layoffs as AI becomes better. What do you do with that as a company leader?
Yeah, I mean, so in my mind, it's no different than what you should be doing anyway. So, the way I've run my teams almost always is I always give my team 20% of their time at work to learn new things. And that sounds like a lot, right? Essentially 1 day a week to go learn new things. In normal times, the value of that is you have people that are always on the top of their game. You have people that are highly engaged, that are loyal to you because they enjoy being able to learn new things and they appreciate that time to stay engaged. So it reduces turnover. Turnover is very expensive. And it's actually, I think it's a good investment. And so if you're doing that anyway, now instead of letting them do whatever they want, now you would focus them. So take that 20% time and focus them on here's things that you need to learn to participate in the new workforce. And you can be a little bit prescriptive. If you look at Saudi, which we were connected through an engagement a conference I was at in Saudi. Saudi has this thing called Saudification, which is basically companies are not allowed to let someone go until they're trained to participate in the workforce in the future. And there's very
focus on improving the overall country independent of just your company.
Right. Absolutely. And so that's a countrywide effort. And yes, you can let employees go, but they need to be able to participate in the economy. And that's an effort to protect the Saudi economy, right? Very deliberate. Now you can think whatever you want about how Saudis run, about all those things. They're doing what I think is the right thing to protect their economy. And so you asked me what a company can do. I kind of describe what a company can do, give people time at work to learn, which you should do anyway. Even the people that are going to stay, that's going to be good for them, good for your engagement, good for your long-term health of your company, because you'll have people that are very well educated on the top of their game. As a country, we should see more countries doing stuff like that to protect their economies.
That's a fascinating perspective. It takes kind of the long-term approach towards reinvesting in the populace, whether they're at a particular company or not, whether they're a consumer or a creator or both. Just make sure you're reinforcing that ecosystem so that it doesn't collapse with this replacement that is potentially coming.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of sound like I'm a nihilist, but I'm not. I'm very optimistic. There's just we need to be very deliberate
Well, it's the
about
balance
how.
between optimism and pragmatism as well, right? Kind of the dual sides.
Absolutely. We just need to be very deliberate about how we implement this technology, how we transition the workforce, what technologies we choose to implement, how we are more inclusive. I mean, I am very much a pragmatist about this, but we need to be very honest with ourselves and our customers as an industry. And I don't feel like as an industry, we're being honest with society and our customers. And that bothers me, as you can tell.
No, I mean, it's great. Clearly you have thought deeply about this and you're not afraid to kind of rip the, what's the expression, wool off the eyes, or just be very blunt about, hey, this is a concern. We need to talk about this. And it's not this, everything's fine, everything's going to be great, there are going to be more jobs. Let's have a real honest conversation about this.
Yeah. And there are going to be more jobs. It's just going to take a while, and there's going to be pain to get there, but there are going to be more jobs.
Do you think we're going to become just further and further in this spiral of technology is parabolic, right? It just keeps getting faster and faster. And so do you think that whatever comes after generative AI, or maybe there's AGI, or maybe there's new technology that's unlocked by, the advances that we have in transformer technology, do you think it's just going to become this shorter and shorter cycle of technical innovation with, we talked about before, it was 3 to 5 generations. Now it's 1. It's going to be, half of a generation or a third of a generation for a technical fundamental shift?
Yeah, I think so. I think we need to really think about what AGI is. That's a whole nother conversation. I don't think we really have a good definition of what that is.
It's this bogeyman that people pull out and no one really knows what it is.
We could have a whole nother conversation about what that is. I think once we get to the other side of AGI, we need to have a conversation as humanity as to where we get value from. Because once we get on the other side of AGI, we're going to be getting towards a place where we don't really need to work.
And when you say get value from, do you mean like intrinsic rewarding and motivation for me existing?
As an individual,
okay.
Right? As an individual, most humans get reward from what they do for a living, or even if you take care of your kids, even if you're a man or a woman who stays home with their kids, that's where your reward comes from, or whether you're a CEO, that's where you get your value from.
Effort, time, work.
Once you get to the other side of AGI, some version of AI is going to be able to start doing that stuff for us. So we're going to need to figure out as a society, as human beings, how do we shift our values from that perspective? How do we as humans get value? Right? Because fundamentally, it's not going to be needed. And so we're not going to be needed for that kind of work. And there's other things that we could be doing, or maybe should be doing, or not, right? But that's a decision as a species that we're going to need to make, and a shift that we're going to need to make. But that I think that's a little ways off. But I think this transition we're going through now will be kind of help us get there. I mean, we're kind of getting very philosophical and maybe even a little metaphysical here, but I think this is that's going to be the next. I don't think the next cycle is going to be any faster. I think the next cycle is going to be more philosophical about how we're going to make that next shift.
It's an interesting. I don't know if you agree with me, but I do think it's going to happen within this generation, right? So within the next 30 years or 20 years or something.
I think within my kids' life it will happen. Within my Elijah's life and my Joshua's life, as opposed to.
So with that, the only thing, let's get philosophical for a bit. So the only thing that I can relate it to is the entrepreneurship journey starts out with, you have an idea, you have some skills, you want to just go build something, you try to build, and then God forbid you have some level of success, whether it's fundraising or customers or growth, immediately you feel outclassed. You feel like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I was just trying to make this thing, and now I feel completely underskilled. I have people that their livelihood and their salary depends on me. I first experienced this as 20 or 21 years old in San Francisco, and it's, imposter syndrome, right? We've heard about it. Some people have experienced it, and there's this aspect too that as you grow, you fill out that role, or you can get replaced with within an organization, and there's kind of this loss of identity of, well, who am I? Am I even good enough? What's the point of it if someone can do it better? So where do you think, from a collective humanity perspective, kind of wrestling with this, what's my identity? If I spent, a third of my life working, or whatever it is, I guess that's sleep, but if I spent a large portion of every week of my life doing work, and that's where I derive meaning, how do we shift and reconcile, okay, that's not who I am anymore. I have to forge a new identity almost.
That's exactly the shift that we as a human race need to make. I mean, we weren't always this way, right? We didn't always have this. Work was not always our identity, right? At some point we made this shift, and it was if you look at the entire span of the human species, this is a very recent occurrence, right? This is a 20th century occurrence that this occurred. So this is a very small slice of humanity that this shift occurred. And so I don't think it's beyond the realm of feasibility that we can shift back out of it. I don't know that it's a bad thing either, but it depends on what we start doing, right? It depends on how we shift what we're doing as a species, or how we're spending our time as a species. We could be doing good things. We could be doing bad things. I mean, it could relate to another kid's cartoon. We could be doing, we could be like Wall-E, sitting in chairs getting fat, right? Or we could be doing things that are very productive, right?
Yeah.
So it just depends on how we choose to spend our time. And again, I don't have the answer, but this is something that I think is worth contemplating.
Absolutely. I want to pull on, you started your background in, was it molecular biology, and you have a PhD. Where does science fit into this world of data science?
So, people used to ask me what data science is, right? And I kind of it's, when you think about data science, right, it's the application of math and computer science. So it's actually the application of math, computer science, and the scientific method to solve business problems. That's really what it comes down to. And so I think fundamentally, that's how, I think if you look at people that really got into this field early on, if you look at the early data scientists, a lot of them had PhDs, and not necessarily math or computer science PhDs. A lot of them were biologists. A lot of them were physicists. A lot of them were economists, right? And it was because they were scientists, they knew how to develop a hypothesis. They knew how to test it. They weren't trying to prove it right. They were trying to prove it wrong, which is the whole point of a scientific experiment. And so they were setting up these experiments to solve business problems in the appropriate way. And that's how this whole field launched, around solving business problems. And so I think that's where this comes in.
Where do you see science kind of coming back into problems being solved? We have, I think recently the Nobel Prize was won by people on forgive me if I get this wrong, but on the DeepMind team with protein folding or something to that effect. I'm curious where we take the insights from transformer technology or the advances in model building in general, and then start reapplying them to whether quantum compute problems that we have been able to solve, or genetics problems, or protein folding problems that historically have been extremely difficult to solve from traditional perspectives and traditional tooling. And yet now we have this new set of tools that we can apply back to, physics, right? Foundational physics potentially is an area to kind of have discovery.
Yeah, I mean, so AlphaFold's a great example, right? So when I was doing my PhD, and even up until AlphaFold was released, an entire biochemistry or biophysics dissertation would be spent trying to determine the crystal structure of a single protein, which is what AlphaFold does. And 5-8 years, someone will be spending 5-8 years trying to figure out what the crystal structure is. And so what AlphaFold now enables someone to do for a dissertation is, instead of spending that 5-8 years doing that, is they spend the first 6 months validating that it's correct. And now they can do some very interesting things with that structure to look at maybe protein-protein interactions, maybe look at protein-drug interactions. So now they can take this and they can actually do some practical application things with it. I think you're going to start seeing, so, and let's just take some basic biology. You have DNA, DNA makes RNA, RNA makes protein, proteins interact with each other, and then these proteins create your metabolism. And I'm very much overgeneralizing. Your metabolism, the interaction of your metabolism is called metabolomics. This has been kind of a holy grail of biology, is understanding and being able to model your metabolism. And I know companies like Google are working on kind of a metabolomics version of AlphaFold. And so being able to do a metabolism version of AlphaFold would have huge implications on drug discovery, because now you can understand, if I put this drug into a human being, what's going to happen to it? What pathways is it going to impact? Which means what disease is it going to impact? What side effects is it going to cause? I have this drug that is on the shelf because it causes side effects. Well, how do I eliminate these side effects? Or how do I modify this drug so it doesn't cause these side effects and it can cure this disease that's been previously incurable, right? And so tremendous potential upsides from what we've seen with AlphaFold for other potential areas.
Kind of taking that, like, there's the technical expansion of AI transformers into better and better, ultimately achieving AGI.
Well, and it's beyond transformers, right? We're getting, I think it goes well beyond transformers.
So, okay, so modeling in general, and would it be correct to say AI, or would it be data engineering, data science? What would
I think
you
it's
call
just,
this kind of...
I think it's AI in general. I think it's just,
So-
it's
So there's kind of these two pathways, right? There's towards AGI, which there's this big existential kind of figuring out the entire world is impacted. We have to come together as humanity. And then there's also on the applied side, right? The applied side being specifically into the hard sciences of leveraging AI in general to have massive advances. Do you think we end up in this world where, again, if everything goes well, no one has to work, you do whatever you want, and then also we're able to, print new livers and have perfectly scripted pills that are tailored just to your body to solve every problem that you have? Like, are we heading towards some utopia, or is this like hyperbolic and never going to happen?
No, I think there's potential to, I think you can have a tricorder that can kind of scan you, know what's wrong with you for 90% of diseases, can prescribe medications. I think I wouldn't be surprised if 50 years from now, absolutely. I don't see why that's not in the realm of possibility. Printing livers, I mean, we can print meat right now. Liver's just meat. I mean, really. So I don't see why not. I mean, imagine being able to print a liver with your stem cells, no more tissue rejection, right? There's no more wait list, right? Even people who are ill can get transplants because, even though they're ill, you're not going to have to forego someone who's more healthy. There's no more prioritization. The healthcare providers don't have to prioritize you versus me and make a life or death. You have to die because I'm healthier, or I have to die because I'm older than you, right? I mean, those are horrible decisions that people are forced to make today, that they have to, right? Because they have to. Imagine them not having to be able to, because now we can print livers, or hearts, or lungs. I don't see why. There's no reason in my mind in 50 years that's not possible.
The goal is to stay alive long enough to see that happen, and
I won't be here.
I'd be
100. I'd be over 105 by then.
Well, hopefully your kids make it then, at least.
Yeah.
Dr. Dobrin, this has been a phenomenal conversation. If you want to leave the audience with one way in which to practice more responsible AI, whether as a business leader or as a consumer, what would you recommend they do?
I would say just be more cognizant of what you're doing, why you're doing it, and make sure that you're using the most appropriate tool for the job.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for coming on the show. If people want to get in touch with you or follow up with you, where should they go?
Either look me up on LinkedIn or go on Substack and check out my newsletter, Silicon Sands News.
Links will be in the description. Thanks again.
Thanks, Elijah.
If you enjoyed that episode, make sure you check out this video right here. And if you really enjoyed it and you listened to the end, take 2 seconds and share the love so someone else might find it by clicking the thumbs up button and subscribing. I appreciate you, and I hope you have a wonderful day. But click that button.